Welcome to the House of Truth. Last week, last time we talked about the wisdom of Saint Patrick and how he got in similar situations to three men and was able to look at three men in the Bible and look about how they handle things to give him the wisdom to handle them in a similar manner. And those three men were Moses, David, and the Apostle Paul, Shaul, or Shaul, as I prefer to call him. The day we're going to talk about, we're going to focus in on one of those men, being as the season of Passover is coming upon us. Now, if you got a count, if you got a standard calendar and you look at it, it'll say April 24th is Passover this year because because they put the date the rabbis put on there. But just something as simple as reading a Wikipedia article on the rabbinic calendar, and you will find that they actually adjust the entire thing so certain holidays only fall on certain days of the week, except, and it can be off by a whole month from what would actually be based on the actual the actual position, the sun, the stars, and the moon, the astronomical spring, except that the Bible actually says. And I've done lessons before on the biblical calendar, and we looked at what the scripture actually says. And I would encourage you to go. I would encourage you to go to my blog. I got several posts on this, and you could look it up, including one called the Biblical Calendar, and you can look and see, and you'll see that indeed, this year it's not super late; it's super early. The day that matters is the feast of, is Bikurim, first fruits falling within a certain range, and it falls on March 31st this year. And that's actually what you use to determine Passover according to the Word of God. So we're beginning our series here. Begin a series. And this year we're focusing on Passover itself primarily. And that begins with the day's lesson. Today we're going to talk about the the time of deliverance. That it could not just occur at any time, but it had to occur. It had to occur when all these conditions that we're going to discuss were right. And what happens, that speaks to our own lives as well. There's God's timing, and we may be going through something, and there's a time for God when God's going to end it. And what happens if we try to take matters in our own hand, as it were, and end it sooner? And these kind of issues is what we're going to look at today. We're going to begin in Exodus 1:6-8. Joseph died, and all his brethren, and all that generation. The children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly and multiplied and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. And now there rose up a new king over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Okay, these three little verses, there's actually a lot packed into them. Most people just sort of glance over and don't even notice, perhaps don't give it enough thought. The first one is that when Joseph died, in all his burden, all that generation. In a few weeks back, we wrapped up our series on the patriarchs with the last days of Israel, and we talked about how the last days of Israel, the man, paralleled the last days of Israel, the people, how he framed the entire history of the Jewish people, of every tribe, particularly with his words. Just as Noah before had framed the entire history, framed the history of the human race with his words. But in there, we ended up with Joseph, and we showed how The time from when Joseph died to the Exodus is only 144 years. But it says, and is buried in all that generation. Joseph may not have been the last to die from that generation. Benjamin Benjamin was 6 years younger than him. He could have, if they all lived 100, if they all lived the same age, Benjamin would have died later. But so it's 144 was the max possible we talked about last time, but it's not that's maximum, but it's not even like that's not necessarily means it's even that long. And we'll look at that in a moment in more detail. Now, notice this where it says they multiplied and waxed zeal, and the land was filled with them. Well, there's a lot in there to that. They multiplied, okay, but notice mostly they increased, they were fruitful. You know, we're talking about this like the commandment, fruitful means they were useful. They were doing things of value and import, things that added value to Egypt where they were at. And they increased abundantly is talking about their wealth. And we saw that, and if you remember, Joseph was feeding them, in that time of taxation. They were free from it. It gave them an advantage. So not only are they hard working, but what the work of their hand was being blessed as well. And they multiplied in numbers. They didn't stay at 70, and we'll talk in the future about how many there were. Perhaps a little more detail, but it wasn't millions. We can, and we'll be able to demonstrate that and even show that to some extent today. And we'll talk about where they got so many people later as well. They waxed exceedingly mighty. They were strong. Now, but this last phrase is the most important one of all. The land was filled with them. The land of Egypt was filled with them. Well, what's that mean? They were no longer, many of them had left Goshen. They didn't live throughout the land of Egypt. They only lived in the land of Goshen. That's all the king, that's all this Pharaoh that knew Joseph, that had known Joseph, gave him. And as we talked about before, we'll show again today. Goshen was inside the boundaries of the greater promised land that God had promised Abraham. So they were actually in the promised land, even though they were even though it was in Egypt. That portion of Egypt was included as part of the promised land. And but when they left it, what happened? Just like we saw the pattern before with Abraham and Isaac, in particular, when they got outside the promised land, they got outside the land, outside their calling, and things didn't go well for them. And there's some more problems that come from them from being so filled with them. Indicates they're in the cities as well. They're just everywhere people will look, they'd find a Hebrew somewhere. They're not all in one place where they're supposed to be. And that's kind of set the tone for what's going to as we're going to see goes on after this. And lastly, this new king rose up, a new king over Joseph, which knew not over Egypt, which knew not Joseph. Okay, this king knew nothing about Joseph, and we'll show how a little more detail of it. What says there rose up? The Hebrew word implies he rose to power violently. And we'll discuss that in a moment here in a little more detail. But these three things really set the stage for this waiting, the timing of deliverance. Now we continue on in Exodus 6, verse 16, and read the following. And these are the names of the sons of Levi according to their generations: Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the years of the life of Levi were 137 years. Okay, so Levi is the only one besides Joseph we're told his age, but we'll notice it's 137 years. Now he was born 12 years before Joseph. He was the second. He was the second born. So he's born. So he's born when Jacob is 79 years old, making him born in 22 in from when Adam formed the dust, year 2247. When he lived under 37, he dies year 2384. The Exodus from Egypt appears in 2513. But we see down here, I give him 138 there because it probably wasn't like Levi died and just was if he was actually the last. And the day he died, they all went into slavery. There was a gap, and so perhaps a year's gap, which gives 128 years. 128 years between when they're enslaved when the slavery begins and when when it ended with the Exodus. Now, it may have been shorter. And and if it did start as soon as he died and he was the very last one, it could possibly be 229 years. But realistically, 128 is probably the maximum it could have been, as we said before. We'll touch on this again a little later. Now, so that's the first thing to know. The first thing to know, it didn't even begin after Joseph died. It began after the last of the generation. The last one whose age we know is Levi. Now we continue on Isaiah 50 in Isaiah 52:4. We find out something valuable about this king, this Pharaoh that rose up that knew not Joseph. For thus says the Lord God, my people went down aforetime into Egypt to sojourn there, and the Assyrian oppressed them without cause. This king that knew not Joseph was an Assyrian. Egypt had a series over. Egypt wasn't like Japan reputes that it has the current emperor is the 127th in a row in the same dynasty. Well, Egypt had many dynasties, and most of them were lucky they made it 5 generations. And among those were foreign rulers called huklas. Some of them came in, and the way the Egyptians had their thing set up, it was very susceptible to this. If someone came in, basically killed the king, took over the throne, he's pretty much accepted as ruler. Okay. And that made it possible for foreign rulers to gain control of Egypt fairly easily. And that's what happened here with this Assyrian. And it tied back into their religion and basically believed believe the gods, the gods that put someone else in the place of their old king or whatever. But it's an Assyrian, and the Egyptians, by the way, didn't like the huklas, and tried to. And after the huklas after a dynasty of a hukla would die off, they'd actually go through the periods of try to erase their memory because they didn't like to admit that they've been ruled over by foreigners. So this is why this king does not know Joseph. If he'd grown up there, he'd know who Joseph was. He'd have heard of him. But this king, this Pharaoh, was a foreigner who came in and really didn't know much about Egypt except he wanted to be in charge and get its wealth. Okay, so now we saw this foreigner is going to comes in and oppresses the children of Israel. Now let's read about how that. And by the way, Assyrian, the Antichrist is referred to as the Assyrian 23 times. By that title, more than any other, probably all his other titles combined. Many of his titles, like Antichrist, only appear once, twice. Some only once. The beast is probably the most common in the Brit Hadashah, as I said, the New Testament. But so just a little side thought there, a little perhaps prophetic foresight there. Now we continue on in Exodus 1, verse 9 through 14. And he said unto his people, behold, the people, the children of Israel, are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, lest they multiply. And it come to pass that when they're fallen out any war, they join also our enemies and fight against us, and so get them up out of the land. Therefore, they did set up them taskmasters to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom, and Ramses. And the more they afflicted them, the more they grew and multiplied. And they were grieved because of the children of Israel. And the Egyptians made the children of Israel to serve with rigor, made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar and in brick and all manner of service in the field. All their service when they made them serve was with rigor. Okay, so let's first of all let's start off examining the words of this the Assyrian again has that kind of connection, foreshadowing in some regards of the Antichrist. Let's read some of his words. And give a little thought to the truthfulness of them. Okay, he says they are more and mightier than we. Like Hitler, this is a lie. If they really were more and mightier than we, then the Egyptians couldn't have really brought them into bondage. The Israelites, the children of Israel, whether rose up and fought against them or took some other kind of action. This world relies on the strong oppressing the weak. So first of all, he starts with a lie. They're not more mighty than we. We'll show that in a little more detail as we move along. Now we continue on. Come, let us deal wise with them, lest they multiply and come to pass when they fall to the war, they join under our enemies. Okay, the accusation is they're going to join the enemies and fight against us. Well, he had just came in as an enemy, took over Egypt, and they didn't rise up and fight against him. There's absolutely no foundation for this accusation. Again, just like the accusations of Hitler that Jews caused, just totally made up statistic numbers that were supposed to be statistics, percentage of theft from them, and so on and so forth. Same sort of spirit here. And there's absolutely no truth to this at all. And for one thing, he's making assumptions about people he doesn't know very well. And and this is perhaps a little bit of repercussions from Abraham and Isaac doing the same thing as we saw before when they went out to the promised land, and they made accusations against the ruler that just proved to be totally false. Okay, but they based them on assumptions, and now there's a false accusation to be leveled against their descendants. But here's the root of it: so they get them up out of the land. That's his real concern. I mean, if they're a problem, let them leave. Like I'm always telling people who say they don't like the United States, ICE will let you leave without filling out any paperwork. Just get a plane ticket and go. So his concern is he doesn't want them to leave, because remember we talked about they were fruitful. They're beneficial to Egypt. And this is his real thing. He doesn't want them to leave. He knows they're hard workers, and he wants to put that hard work to use. For what? They built for Pharaoh treasure cities. This is all about his ego. He wants these cities built, and he needs laborers to do it. And he knows they're strong. And so on and so. But now they're multiplying and growing as they're being afflicted. So now the Egyptians, they see the problem getting bigger, but they also don't want them to leave. If they want to leave, they would not do anything. They could just say, "Hey, leave." And the children of Israel were just left. But instead, they put them in this bondage. And I want you to know, serve with rigor, mentioned twice. Now, if you go look at the Torah, in the Torah, it allows for slavery to pay off debts, but you cannot do it with rigor. And this plan right here he has can best be expressed in the plantation system in American history, in the plantation system that was in place for about 100 years inside the United States, a little over 100 years, about 150 years, I guess. And the man who brought that there was already slavery since 1680, but around 1712, this guy moved here from Jamaica. They had the plantation, introduced the plantation system that became popular throughout the South. That was again making people serve with rigor. And he brought it from Jamaica, but the people in Jamaica who brought it got their inspiration exactly from right here. So this is not like this is just total oppression of this other people. And by the way, the Egyptians are darker skinned than the Hebrews. They can kind of identify the Hebrews by that. And we know this from the picture. We know this from the pictures that inside the pyramids. You have the Ethiopians darker than the Egyptians. The Egyptians, then you have this race that show out working in the fields and doing all the work, who are lighter skinned. I don't mean so-called white people. I just mean lighter, a medium shade of brown, as opposed to a darker shade. Now we continue on in Exodus 1 in verses 15 through 19. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, which the name one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when do you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, and sit him upon stools, there be a son, you shall kill him, but if it be a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God, not as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. The king of Egypt called them for the midwives, said unto them, why have you done this thing, if saved the men alive? And the midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as Egyptian women, they are lively or delivered ere the midwives come in unto them. Okay, first of all, I want you to notice he spoke to the Hebrew midwives, and their names are preserved because of what they did. Okay, because they feared God. They will not do as the king commanded. But I want you to notice there's only two. Now, there's really millions of Hebrews. Two midwives couldn't be sufficient. It tells us, well, the Hebrews grew and multiplied in number. They didn't. They had to be in the hundreds or maybe low thousands for two midwives to be able to handle all the births. And down here at the bottom is a very enlightening statement here. Not as the Egyptian women. Egypt was the first place that we know had physicians. We read about them. We read about them. One of their jobs was embalm people, make mummies of them. And the reason was, according to the Egyptians' own writing, the Egyptians, particularly their women, seemed to be more prone to sickness than anyone else on earth. They were definitely doing something wrong with the way they lived their lives. And part of that, of course, often was like with any society, not getting enough physical exercise. Not getting enough sunlight. They're particularly the rural. You have this problem every side. People die from King's disease, as they used to be calling them, and that came from not being outside, not getting exercise, and so on and so forth. Not getting out in the sun enough, except. And the same thing's going, but the Hebrew women are strong, and their statement is probably true. A lot of times they are. Now we just said they saved the men children alive, so in some cases they were needed, but a lot of times the women really were delivering it before they got there. And Pharaoh knows this. We're looking at Pharaoh's reaction here in a minute, but this is believable to Pharaoh. And of course, they're stronger. They're outside in the sun. They're working. They're doing all those things, and to some degree, they're probably eating a better diet as well. Because remember, Abraham walked in those statutes and commandments of God, even though they hadn't been written down yet. He's already walking in them. That passes him. As we saw with Noah, clean and unclean were already known. And so they're probably eating less of the unclean food than perhaps their neighbors. So they perhaps have a better diet as well. And also, the rich people tend to overeat too much sugar and fat historically. The richer people, so they're also being giving a better diet to begin with. Not as tasty, but a lot better for them. Now we continue on in Exodus 1, in verses 20 through 22. Now, therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very, very mightily. And it came to pass, because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. And Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every son that is born shall cast to the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Okay, so God dealt well with the midwives. And what happened? The people multiplied and waxed exceedingly. They're still having children. They're probably having a disproportionately more boys than girls, because it's about multiplying that seed, and that's how the seed gets multiplied. And they feared God. Because of that, look, God blessed them. He made them houses. And what's that mean? It doesn't mean he gave them some place to live in. They already had somewhere they were living in. He means he gave them a house of children, except these midwives were midwives, perhaps for whatever reason. They hadn't gotten married, could find a suitable husband, or whatever the case was, or they perhaps were married and were barren. Whatever the case was, they didn't have their own children, and God blessed them with those. So now Pharaoh's charges people and to do this, and this is not unlike Hitler. I mean, Hitler. Some people, I heard some old people from Germany once talking about, or the people who talked to him saying, "Oh, that they said that they never had so good as they did under Hitler." Well, of course, their economic status improved. Hitler, if you turn to your Jewish neighbors, you got their stuff. Well, yeah, that's an instant boost, an instant immediate boost to your income. Of course, what these people are leaving out is later all that stuff got destroyed when the Allies the Allies basically liberate the Jews, and they lost all that stuff, and their stuff they had before. Not to mention 1/3 of the people of Germany died in World War II, but somehow they gloss over that and ignore that part. So Pharaoh's got a similar strategy here. He's telling us, he's perhaps not offering the reward, but he is telling them to do this. And just like the Germans, some obeyed Hitler and some didn't. Some resisted. And that's why you have like the hiding place. I know that was in Holland, another country, but in Germany too, numerous people. And the Nazis kept record. Otherwise, we didn't really know how many there was. A lot of these people, over 6 million Christians died in the Holocaust. 6 million Jews, by the way, escaped during the Holocaust. And these Christians died in the Holocaust for hiding Jews, for not going along with it. They literally trade their lives for the lives of those Jews. And honestly, most of them weren't very good at it. They were caught and they were caught and shot on the spot. No trial, nothing. And by the world forgot, we wouldn't even know about them. The Germans hadn't been meticulous record keepers, and wrote this stuff down for posterity. So, same strategy here by Pharaoh. Now, there's some details we're going to see that makes it apparent that this whole thing probably didn't even start till close to the time of Moses, when Moses was born. Remember that 100, in Moses, back to our thing, was born 80 years before the Exodus. which puts him at 2433, year 2433. So somewhere in this gap, in this 48-year gap, we have the start of slavery. And it appears to be close to the time of the birth of Moses. Well, not the slavery. This part is certainly close to the time of the birth of Moses. We'll explain that in a minute. In Exodus 2, verses 1 through 3, we read the following. And there was a man of the house of Levi and took to wife a daughter of Levi. The woman conceived and bare a son, and when she saw him, he was a goodly child. She hid him 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes and daubed it with slime with pitch, and put the child therein, and he laid it in the flags by the river's brink. Okay. So this man, this man of the house of Levi, we'll talk about him and his wife here in a little more detail, but notice they're both from Levi, who we talked about when he died. She conceived and bore a son. That son's Moses. He's not the oldest. Aaron's older than him. Now, there's no story about her hiding Aaron. Aaron's dies at 123. Moses dies at 120. There's a little gap between when they die, but it's not that big. So, Aaron's at least 3 years older than Moses, perhaps a little more. And somewhere between Aaron's birth and Moses' birth, that decree was given. So that means this Pharaoh rose up, couldn't have risen up a long time perhaps before the birth of Moses. And we'll see more about that later. So she hid him 3 months. Now, when she could not hide him, okay, I mean, the problem is, of course, he's making noise. And no one's turned her in, I want you to notice. No one's taken him and killed him. But she knows sooner or later someone is going to. Perhaps all of her neighbors were Hebrews. Perhaps she was off in the land of Goshen. But perhaps the soldiers went through regularly inspecting, looking for male children. Perhaps she had some neighbors that weren't Hebrews, and there's some hint. We'll look at a future lesson that could have been the case as well. And maybe they were just keeping quiet about it, but one day maybe one of them wouldn't. Okay, so she put them in the bulrushes and did this. And I forgot to bring this up here. Why cast into the river? Because the Nile River, the Egyptians worshipped it as a god. It brought the life. I mean, there's desert on both sides of the area around the Nile River. There's food abundance there, and it also all the wealth from Africa, from the cataracts. The cataracts were waterfalls that made it navigable upstream from there. But from there down, all this wealth of Africa flowed to the Nile. People would bring camels down to the end of the cataracts, and up to people up from other countries came in for trade into Egypt, and the Nile was their source of wealth, of life and wealth, and so this is a sacrifice to the Nile. And why the men? And notice the men only. Well, why that? Because as we talked about last week, this is demonic. This is not just about the men are the ones going to carry the seed. This is about that seed that's going to come through the descendants of Israel. Look, first of all, the Messiah is going to have to come through one of these, but also the promises concerning the 12 tribes and all those things Jacob said in the last days of Israel we discussed can't come to pass unless there's at least one man for each of those tribes left to multiply and so on and so forth. So he's going after the men. The women, they can use them for wives or concubines or whatever. But the men, and again, remember, it's demonic. Hashatan, Satan is behind this man, just like he's behind the power. He's behind the Antichrist. Now we'll go back to where we were. And bulrushes and flags are kind of like cattails. They're a little different. They're a little bit different shape. And notice the ark. Remember, we talked about before that word just means box. Okay. But like the ark that Noah made, literally is box. Same sort of bulrush instead of gopher wood, but she puts it inside and out with pitch and slime that would dry and make it waterproof. And she lays it just at by the river's brink in the flags, just offshore, where perhaps a passerby wouldn't see it. Because if it gets in the stream, if it gets in the flowing water, it's out to the ocean. And there's also this danger of there's also crocodiles in the Nile. In fact, the word crocodile, the word came from the Greek and it means lizard of the Nile. So now we're going to read a little bit more about this woman and her husband. We began here in Exodus 6:18 through 20. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Izhar, Hebron, and Uziel. In the years of the life of Kohath were 133 years. And the sons of Merari, Mahali, Mushi. These are the families of Levi according to their generations. And Amram took Jochebed, his father's wife, sister, to wife. And she bare Aaron and Moses. And the years of the life of Amram were 137 years. 37 years. Okay, so what do we know here? Look, Moses' mother was also his great aunt. And at a certain point, he didn't go very far, and he had cousins. People were cousins on mother's side and father's side, and so the family tree here is a bit of a bush. Okay, so that's first thing worth noting here. That's why he marries a woman in Levi. Notice there's not that many. Levi had 3 sons, and we see here 2 of the sons. And if I showed you the other one, you'd see the rest of them. And that's all there was in that generation. As far as sons go, there's 6 here, and there's less than a dozen Levites, period. And the other tribes, perhaps similar cases. If you remember, when I had the numbers and looked at the numbering of them, we found the Levites were pretty close to the average. The tribe size was pretty close to average. Okay, so it tells us something. This is why 2 midwives can handle this. Now, of course, Amram's generation is going to have more kids. So the number of Israelites are in the hundreds or low thousands at the most. That's something that tells us this. And we'll discuss this in greater detail in a future lesson. But we're actually given their names. There's so few that we're actually given their names here. Now, here's the other outstanding characteristic about the parents of Moses. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hid 3 months of his parents. Because they saw him as a proper child, they were not afraid of the king's commandment. The faith was that of the parents of Moses, not Moses. They hid him. And they weren't afraid of the king's commandment. They also had faith. And it tells us that they and these midwives are worshipers of God. The worshipers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And they have faith in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, what about Moses here? He's only with his parents 3 months.
How's he going to get any? How's he going to get faith? Faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. How's he going to? How's he going to hear? I mean, it's 3 months old. If they spoke to him, chances are he would remember it. Well, let's continue on, and we're going to see that. We're going to see how he's being prepared for the time of deliverance here in Exodus 2, as we continue on to Exodus 2 in verses 4 through 6. And his sister stood afar off to wit what would be done with him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself in the river, and her maidens walked along by the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. And she had compassion on them and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Okay, so yeah, now, first of all, the wash stuff at the river. She didn't, when going into the main part of the river where the crocodiles were set. We know this from archaeology. They had like a little stone enclosure where part of the wire would come in, like through a gate, perhaps, but nothing, but too large for anything. But maybe the smallest of crocodiles perhaps could get in there, but they're too small to actually do to kill anyone. And of course, she had it checked out first or whatever. Now she's real brave here. She sends her maids over to the flag so the crocodiles might be hiding, and the woman to fetch it. Okay, and she opens the box. No, she opened it. It had a lid. She saw the child and so this is one of the Hebrews' children. How'd she know that? Again, they look differently. Their skin not so-called white like Europeans, but lighter enough in tone that's obvious. They're not Egyptians, even as a young child. But she has a problem. She's a young she's well, we don't know her age. Perhaps she's a young woman, perhaps a little older, but she doesn't. But she's got some way to feed this child, and that's where we come in at Exodus 2, verse 7 through 10. Then said his sister to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to you a nurse of the Hebrew women that she may nurse the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the maid went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse it for me, and I'll give you your wages." And the woman took the child, and the woman took the child and nursed it. And the child grew, was brought in Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses, says, because I drew him out of water. Okay, so it's actually fairly funny. Jochebed had been hiding Joseph for 3 months and taking care of him in fear of her life, except in fear of the baby's life. Now she's being paid to take care of him and nurse him. And notice the child didn't go back to Pharaoh's daughter until he's weaned. Okay. Now we don't know how long that was, but Isaac, it was a ridiculously long amount of time. But all during that time, she was able to speak to him at a young formative age, the words of God, and pour that into him. Tell him over and over again about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, about Noah, etc. Remind him of these promises. And she was able to build a faith in him. I mean, Martin Luther said, "Give me a child till he's 5 years old, and I'll have that person for life." So in those formative years there, she's put that into Moses. Now, I want you to notice his name is Moses. She calls him Moses, gives him the name after he's been weaned. This indicates that Pharaoh's daughter's barren. Perhaps she just refused to get married, but probably not the case. Or her father would probably make her get married for political advantage or something eventually, perhaps. But she definitely wanted a child, and there's no more recording after this after she took this child, it appears that the killing of the Hebrew children was over. It just lasted a short while, and it's back to being demonic. It was really about this child, Moses. And all those other Hebrew boys were collateral damage. Yes, he wanted them taken out, like I said, the whole race, but mostly this one. Just like Messiah, when he was born, after when he was 2 years, actually when he was 2 years old, more accurately, but when he was young, Herod tried to take him out. He escaped, and all those other children, all the way up to north of Jerusalem at Ramah, a big, large area, were 2 years young, old, and below, and younger. All those boys were died, and they were collateral damage. Herod really cared about the one, or cared more about the one, particularly. It's the same here with Moses. And this is why the oppression ended. I mean, Pharaoh's daughter undoubtedly had a part of it. Pharaoh, perhaps maybe only had one daughter. Maybe she was a real daddy's girl, and he couldn't he couldn't see her cry, and she was going to cry if he killed Moses. So Moses is spared because of this. And I want you to notice this: Moses is an Egyptian name. The Egyptian, names him that, and we are given no other name. To my knowledge, there is no other name in the entire Bible that Moses ever called by except Moses. And some people go on about, well, we got to have these Hebrew names, and they'll talk about Yeshua. That's his Hebrew name. They'll incorrectly use Yeshua as his Aramaic name, as if that was actually but it's Yeshua in Hebrew, the salvation of the Lord, and say, well, you can't go around calling him Jesus or Jesus like Paul did when he wrote letters to the Greeks. Shaul, he used the Greek name, the Greek word, and the Greek name because they couldn't pronounce Yeshua anyways. Well, Moses has a Gentile name, and it's the only name he has. This is just other nonsense about Hebrew somehow being a whole being the Lashon Kadosh, the holy tongue, and there's something that. It's rabbinic nonsense. Moses is called by his Egyptian name his entire life. If his parents gave him a Hebrew name, we don't know what it is. Again, in my knowledge, the Bible doesn't record it, and it certainly doesn't use it. It uses the Egyptian name all the time. Now let's continue on with Acts 7, verses 20 through 22. At which time Moses was born and was exceeding fair and nourished up in his father's house 3 months. And when he was cast out, Pharaoh's daughter took him and nourished him for her own son. And Moses learned all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deed. Okay, so now we get the completion of Moses' being raised. Nursed by his mother, pouring in the word of God to her till he's weaned, then handed off to Pharaoh's daughter, who raised him as her own son. He's a prince of Egypt, as the movie said. The prince of Egypt is correct in that regard. And notice he learns all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He is sent to the finest schools, except. But he's not just a casual learner. He's mighty in words and in deeds. He's a man of action as well, and actually can make a good speech. That's what it means by mighty in words. Moses, as far as the world is concerned, has it made. He's got wealth. He's got power. With that comes all the pleasures he could manage to get from the world out of it through being involved with a large number of women or whatever the case may be. But Moses is a man of action, though. He's not just going to lounge around, but nonetheless, he's like, in this regard, President Trump. President Trump, instead of running for president, could have just hung out at his resorts for the rest of his life and carried on living in that manner. And Moses was the same way. But like President Trump, he chose a different path eventually. And here's what we're going to see here in Exodus 2, verses 11 through 15. And it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, he had went out from his brethren, and looked on their borders. He spied an Egyptian smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. He looked this way and that. When he saw that there was no man, he slew the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And without the second day, behold, two men of the Hebrews strode there. He said to them, he said to him that did the wrong, wherefore smite your fellow? Why are you beating your fellow? And he said, who made you? And he said, who made you a prince and a judge over us? Intends you to kill me as you killed the Egyptian? And Moses feared and said, surely this thing is known. When Pharaoh heard this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh and dwelt in the land of Midian. He sat down by a well. Back to my. So, like my Trump analogy, there came a point where you could see action was needed to be taken. And being a man of action, he took it. That wasn't convenient for him at all. You know, in Moses again, in modern times, Trump would be a good example of the same kind of thing that Moses did in that regard. Now, so when Moses does this, though, notice this is he's now he's spying Egyptian, smiting a Hebrew, one of his brethren. I mean, he wasn't just he served with rigor, was out to kill. You know, Moses perhaps feared this Egyptian was going to just beat this guy to death. So he slew him and hit him in the sand. Now, what a terrible plan. I've seen cartoons of, little drawings people have made or whatever, humorous things with the Egyptian's feet sticking out of the sand. I mean, it's sand, it'll blow away. Sure, it was quick and easy way to hide the body, but it wasn't very effective. And not surprisingly, it's already been discovered by the next day. He looked to make sure no one was watching, but it didn't take him long to put two and two together. Oh, Moses and that taskmaster went down there, but Moses is the only one that came out. So, and there was one witness, by the way. That was the man Moses rescued, who perhaps blabbed to other people about it. Say, oh, I thought I was going to be dead, but then Moses showed up and killed the Egyptian. Either way, his plan was far from foolproof. Just like prisons are full of people who had a foolproof plan. Now, why is Moses going to flee? Because the law is, if you kill, remember from Noah, if by man you shed blood, by man your blood must be shed. Moses was the prince. He could have just had that guy stop. He probably could have took lots of other actions against him. But his anger rose up on him. He let get control of him, and he ran, and he tried to, and he took matters in his own hands, and it did not work out well at all. He had to flee for his life. Now we're going to look at what that entails here. Some more details about that here in Acts 7, verse 23 through 29. And when he was fully 40 years old, it came in his heart to visit the brethren of his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffered wrong, he defended them and avenged that was oppressed and smote the Egyptian. For he supposed brethren would have understood that how that by his hand would deliver them. But they understood not. The next day he showed himself to them as they strove and would have set them at one again, saying, sirs, brethren, why do you do one another wrong? Wrong one to another. But he that did his neighbor wrong thrust him away, saying, Who made you ruler and judge over us? Will you kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? Then fled Moses, saying, It was a stranger in the land of Midian, where he begat two sons. So, I'll say things. We're given the age here of Moses, 40 years old. And he had come to the revelation that God had put him, he was in this great position, had political power and stuff, and it was to deliver the people of the Israelites from this bondage to Egyptians. But what he didn't understand was it was not the time of deliverance had not came yet. So he took matters in his own hands, tried to force it to be now, because we're being oppressed or something. We want it to end today, not 10 years down the road or 20 or 40. We want it to end now. Moses understood he was delivered, but he didn't understand it was not the time for deliverance had not rose yet, had not came. So the end result was he lost all his power in Egypt and became a refugee in Midian. Now, why would he do this? And that's is answered for us here in Hebrews 11, verse 24 through 27. By faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction of the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the approach of Christ greater than the riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect to the recompense and reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Okay, notice first of all, when he's 40, he had that moment, and that moment of choice. And by killing this Egyptian, Pharaoh then sought to kill him. Because Pharaoh can't go around that, can't go around. He'll lose all his power if people can't trust him to, just let people get away with murder like that. So he made his choice to not be known as Pharaoh's daughter, the son of Pharaoh's daughter, when he did that. Again, he could have used that authority and held this guy to stop beating on him and so on and so forth. Perhaps took it to the court of Egypt and whatever, and made a case or whatever. But instead, he did this. But his thing was he was making a choice really between suffering with the people of God, affliction, or enjoying the pleasures of sin. Why would he do this? Because he had faith of Messiah, the approach of Messiah, the one that was spoken of to Adam, to Eve more specifically, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that coming deliverer, whose time had not yet come. But being reproached like that deliverer would be, was more valuable than the treasures of Egypt. And see, the same should be true for us. It is more better to suffer persecution for Messiah than to have all the treasures this world can offer. The pleasures of sin, notice there's pleasure in them, are only for a season. Then they're gone, and it's eternal torment. Or you can suffer today with the people of God and enjoy eternal pleasures in the world to come. At his right hand, there's pleasures forevermore, the Bible tells us. And that's the reward he had recompense to. He has eyes on the eternal, not on the temporary. He forsook Egypt. He threw the world away. Again, from the world's view, he had it made. He had everything the world tells you is valuable. But he saw it as it was, really, which is worthless. And what allowed him to endure was as if he was saw him who was invisible. He had faith in the God his mother had told him about growing up. And all the brainwashing of all the learn the wisdoms of the wisdom of the Egyptians was not able to undo it. Now we're looking about where he fled to, and some important, and how he went to the best possible place he could have fled. We're beginning, and we're beginning with our understanding of this from Genesis 25, verses 1-4. Then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimram and Yokshan and Midian and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Asherim, Letashim, and Leummim. And the sons of Midian, Ephah and Epher and Hanok, more literally, Abadah and Eldaah. These are the children of Keturah. Okay, Abraham circumcised them. Circumcised these children. He taught them about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, the God of Abraham at that time, the God of Abraham, Noah, and Adam, or however you want, or Enoch. And notice at Midian, it takes. Now, there's nothing to indicate any association with God in the names. In the names, these other two brothers that were given here name their children. Okay, but were the names of Jokshan's children, I should say. But in his grandchildren. But notice, Ephah and Epher, a note, dedication. Abadah, my father, reference to God. Eldaah, another reference to God. Midian, at this time, is connected to the God of Abraham, He's not lost that connection, and we see he passed it on. Just through the names of his children alone tells us this. Now we continue on in Genesis 2 verses in Exodus 2. I'm sorry. In Exodus 2, in verse 16-22, and we'll see where this comes into play. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters. They came and dwelt and drew water and filled the troughs of the water to their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up and helped them and watered their flock. Then they came to Ruel, their father, and said, "How have you come home? How have you come so soon today?" They said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and drew enough water for us and watered the flock." And he said to his daughters, "Where are they? Where is he? Why is it you've left the man? Call him, they may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses Zipporah his daughter. And she bare him a son and called his name Gershom, for he said, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." Okay, we mentioned those 2 sons earlier. Now here's one of them. But notice he's a priest of Midian. Midian, again, naming his children's names indicates he still kept a connection with the God of Abraham. He's not a priest of idol worshippers. He's not a priest to an idol temple. And this is probably partly why he's out there hanging out near the backside of the desert. You know, he's in the minority here. He's still worshiping God. And the fact the priest tells us there's other people as well, including his own daughters. Okay. Because, priest is an intermediary between God and man. And notice he's a priest, not under the order of Levi that would come later. And he perhaps is under the order of Melchizedek, like it happened with when Abraham went to Melchizedek in Hebrew, if you prefer. So he's a priest of the Most High God, and now Moses has come across perhaps the one man that can train him in the things of God more thoroughly, perhaps in all the world. He's at the right place. He's gone to the right place. Now, this guy has $7. No mention of any sons for him. And notice the first name's given him is Ruel, that connection to God there again, El, showing us, connect to the God of Abraham. And notice they identify Moses as an Egyptian. Well, he ran with whatever clothes he had on, and undoubtedly, being the prince of Egypt, his royal apparel, he didn't throw chunks away like you may have seen in the movies, wherever it's the only clothes he had. He's clearly identifiable as an Egyptian. And perhaps the eye paint has not worn off, except, okay? So, and being a prince, he may have took a chariot. He may have just said, "Hey, give me your chariot" to somebody, and took off, to the border of Egypt, and then left the chariot there, and went and once got to Midian, as I discussed before, Pharaoh didn't want to provoke a war, so that was Moses was escaped once he went there, but he still has somewhere to live, and he comes across this guy, and he's the one man. He's the one man, and notice how again he's the deliverer. He cannot help himself. He is a deliverer, and he delivers these women. The shepherds have drove them away and delivered them out of the hand of the shepherds, indicates some sort of harassment from the shepherds, and maybe even the shepherds had other intents for them women beyond just, beyond beyond watering the flocks, denying them water to their flocks. So, and notice Moses is content. Life is good for Moses. He's content. He's going to stay with this man. He's going to work for him. He's going to learn from him. All is good. He marries Zipporah, the oldest, who's probably the oldest daughter. He appears to be the oldest. And that was the customs we saw before. You got to marry the oldest before you marry the younger ones. And the son, he calls him, "I have been a stranger in a strange land." No, it's not "I am a stranger in a strange land," referring to Midian, but "have been," referring to Egypt. He was in the world, they did not belong to, but he was not of the world. He was in Egypt, looked like an Egyptian. Was a prince of Egypt, the whole 9 yards, but he never was. But he was in Egypt, but he was not part of Egypt. He was a stranger in a strange land. Why was that strange? And why is it a land, a strange land? It wasn't the promised land. Now we continue. We get a little more insight here about his sons. His names are meaningful. Remember, their sons, plural. We're about the other one here in Exodus 18, verses 2-4. Then Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, took Zipporah, Moses' wife, after he'd sent her back. Their two sons, which was the name of one was Gershom, where he said, "I've been an alien in a strange land." And the name of the other was Eleazar. "For the God of my father," said he, "was mine help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh." All right, the God of my father. Again, his father, Amram, was a worshiper of the God of Abraham. Moses was apparently circumcised on the 8th day, wait for the basket incident ever happened. Which, if Pharaoh's daughter looked into the equivalent of a diaper that he was wearing, would have been a dead giveaway he was a Hebrew. The Egyptians weren't circumcising their children at this point. And they recognize that God has been his help and delivered him from the sword of Pharaoh. He lived in Egypt, but never fit in. He was a stranger there, an alien. And God's the one who's delivered him in his trouble and delivered him from Pharaoh. What the king of that world, and the Egyptians sometimes worship Pharaoh as God. You could say the God of that world. And see, it's the same for us. We are aliens in this world if we're followers of Messiah. We have to look to God for our help, and He's going to be the one to deliver us from the God of this world, from the destruction the God of this world has planned for us. Now, we continue on. Now we're going to look at we're look at another important aspect to know. That's in Genesis 15, verses 13 through 18. Because Moses is now content. He had delivered those daughters when he saw them in trouble, but he's content. Life's good. He's done. As far as he's concerned, he's done trying to deliver the Hebrews, children of Israel. They wouldn't have. They didn't accept. They wouldn't take him as deliverer anyways. They rejected him. But it just was the time had arrived, and here's why. We're told here in Genesis 15, verse 13 through 18. And he said to Abraham, for surely your seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, shall serve them, and they shall afflict him 400 years. Also that nation which they shall serve, I will judge, and afterward they shall come out with great substance. And you shall go into your fathers in peace, you shall be buried in a good old age. In the fourth generation they shall come here again. For the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. And it shall come to pass, when the sun went down, it was dark. Behold, a smoking furnace, a burning lamp that passed between the pieces. In that same day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates. Okay, we're going to start at the bottom there for a moment. That river of Egypt I referred to earlier, that's what the land of Goshen was. The Nile River, as it gets near the Mediterranean, splits into 7 separate smaller rivers to form the Nile Delta. And that river that's closest to the land of Israel today, the easternmost branch is referred to as the Brook of Egypt in another place. That's the river of Egypt. That's where the land of Goshen was. And remember, that's where they're supposed to be staying. That was the land given to them. And they kept them separate from the Egyptians. But we saw they were scattered throughout the land of Egypt. And with that came problems. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But I want you to notice this. This 400 years. Now, if you're in the King James, it shall afflict them 400 years. It sounds like they're going to have 400 years of being in slavery. But as we've shown before, that's not the case. Really, when the translation have been better, they put a colon there or a dash, 400 years. 400 years is this whole process. A stranger in a land that's not theirs shall serve them and afflict them. They're not even in Egypt for 400 years, we already showed. And we know this for a fact. We've shown this before, that the 400 years begins right here on this day when when God appears to Abraham, right? It begins with Isaac being confirmed as the seed that preceded this right here. When Isaac was weaned. And even the Torah itself will tell you this. I believe it's Exodus 12. It was 430 years from when Abraham entered the land, the self same day they left. Entered the land of the promised land. So I just want to bring that out to you again. It's 400 years to the whole process. They're a stranger in a land that's not theirs. True of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the whole time they were in Canaan. The Canaanites never accepted them as fellow Canaanites. They were Hebrews. They were foreigners. Went to Egypt. They're Hebrews. They're foreigners. And we've seen consistently. Hebrews, foreigners, okay? And then and part of that, and during part of that 400-year period, there's also that process of afflicting. And again, the whole process of being in lands that aren't their own. And we showed that the land that came in, that when Jacob came into the land of Egypt and the children of Israel moved to Egypt, was exactly 215 years after. We showed this in a previous lesson. So right there limited the amount of time they could be slaves. But they weren't even slaves, as we showed 128 years at the max. But we've shown that there's pretty much evidence it wasn't even that long. Because remember this Pharaoh rose that knew not Joseph, that knew not, and that's the same Pharaoh whose daughter Moses, who raised Moses and named him. So he's going to judge him. They're going to come out with great substance. And notice also the fourth generation. The time of deliverance is not to the fourth generation after they go in. And if you go look at it and think about look at what we've already looked at with Moses. You had Levi, Merari, Moses' father was three after Levi. Moses had been five. No, Moses was four after Levi, the fourth generation. But then he has children and grandchildren. So really, it's four generations. Starting with the first generation that's born there in Egypt. Okay, and why? There's another condition that's to be met. The fullness, the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. What's that mean? Sodom and Gomorrah was full and was utterly destroyed. God's not looking to destroy people. He's looking to have mercy on them. But the point will come when mercy is no longer an option. They just simply will not have it. Because there is no salvation without repentance, and there's no repentance without total surrender. And the Amorites were the point where some could be saved still. Some of them, perhaps, through the influence of Abraham, had come to worship God. I mean, obviously, someone's worshiping God besides Abraham. There's Melchizedek has his priesthood going on there. But the Amorites are heading away from that to the point of total rejection. And again, that final measure is like what was shown with Sodom and Gomorrah. We're basically people have become so sick, so twisted and sick away from God that homosexuality is the norm. And that's what God will not destroy the Amorites, which is what the children of Israel do once they're brought in, once they're out of Egypt. Not long after that, they're destroying the Amorites until it's the point of hopelessness for the Amorites. And there just simply is nothing else can be done. So now we're going to continue on Exodus 2, verse 23 through 25. We'll read the following. It came to pass in the process of the king of Egypt died. The children of Israel sighed by the reason of bondage. They cried. Their cry came up from the God by reason of the bondage. God heard their groaning and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God looked upon the children of Israel, and God respected them. Okay, remember the cry? The cry came up to God against Sodom. Well, they're calling, but people will call out to God even today who really don't have any belief in God, who certainly are not walking in his ways. If they get in trouble, they'll call out to him. In America, during Vietnam, there was a saying here in America: there are no atheists in foxholes. So they're crying, and whether they're crying out to God or not, God hears them. And he remembers this covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We just read part of that covenant. That covenant says deliverance cannot come until the fullness of time, till the time comes. And he hasn't forgotten them, and he had respect to them. Why? Not because of them, but because of their fathers. And we can be certain it wasn't because of them, because of what we read right here in Joshua 24, verses 14. Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve with sincerity and truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt. and serve you, the Lord. Remember, they left the land of Goshen. They were scattered. And just like Dinah, her downfall with going into sexual immorality began with her hanging out with the women of the land, the daughters of the land. She learned their ways. They left the land of Goshen, where all the believers of God were, and got out into the Egypt, into the world. I mean, you can think of the land of Goshen, so to speak, as the church, using that term very generically, not meaning the Catholic Church or something, just but the people of God, and going out into the world like the prodigal son and picking up the world's ways. This was not about them. They were not out there serving God and being persecuted, and then God came to rescue them. This was a demonstration of God's mercy to them because of his promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He made deals with them, covenants. They had conditions they had to meet, and they kept their end of the deal. Now God's is going to keep his end. So he's saving them despite their bad behavior, not for their sake, but for the sake of his covenant, and for the sake of even the Egyptians, which we'll see it come into play in our next lesson. Now, we're going to our final section. We read this. Now, Pharaoh kept the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he fled the flock to the backside of the desert, to the mountain of God, even the Horeb. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush burned with fire, and the bush was not consumed. And Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why this bush is not burnt. And the Lord said to him, and the Lord said, he turned aside to see, and God called him out of the midst of the bush, and Moses, and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here am I. Draw your shoes from out draw not nigh here to this place. Not draw nigh here. Put your shoes out your feet. The place you stand is holy ground. Okay. Before I begin that, I want to bring out a point I meant to bring out a moment ago. Also, the king of Egypt died. Now, the Syrian died. And just there was a Pharaoh that knew not Moses. I mean, Joseph, when he died, again, we know this from history, violently taken over, as he had done, by an actual Egyptian. Or perhaps another hookla. It was probably another hookla, come think of it. And this guy did also not recognize, he didn't know who Moses was, just like the former guy didn't know who Joseph was. It's a very important point here. So now the time of deliverance is, so that Pharaoh's gone. And mind you, remember, he's the one that started the slavery. So that slavery could have only went on during his lifetime. Certainly before the time of Moses. Probably wasn't even 128 years. We don't know how long this Pharaoh lived, but he couldn't have been too young when he rose to power. Let's say at least 20. And that'd be young, but let's just say maybe it's 20. And he just died. So now the time of deliverance has come. It's time for another Pharaoh to enter who doesn't know Moses. And we'll see next week that's super important. He doesn't know who Moses is. He's not identifying him as a former prince of Egypt. Now, Moses kept the flock of Jethro's father-in-law. Oh, we read all that. I'm sorry. And Moses said, here to Moses, Anani, here I am. We've seen so many times. He's got to not. Now, notice, a couple of saying things. The angel of the Lord appeared to him. The angel of the Lord, the Melech Adonai. Notice it says God called him out of the midst of the bush, appeared to him in the flame in the midst of the bush, this angel of the Lord is also called God. And the Melech Hanani, as we described many times, is Messiah before he had a human body. No one can see God's face and live. Messiah, Messiah said, no one has ever seen his face. Yet Moses saw the face of God, and perhaps not right here, but later, they were asked to see his face and couldn't, because one was the Father and one was this angel of the Lord, the Messiah, appearing to him. Now, here I am. Now, notice the thing about this fire, that wood, that brush is what? Like wood. And wood's often associated with man. You know, in salvation of man, perhaps the ark, the cross, the Ark of the Covenant, wood on the inside, wood on the inside, covered by gold on the outside. But this fire is the Holy Spirit. It's the Holy Spirit, the Spirit of God in man fused into one, a picture again of the Messiah himself and of us to some degree. We're born again. The Spirit of God dwells in us, but it can also burn in us as a flame to other people. The other people can just see there's something different with us. So this whole thing, that burning bush is the angel of the Lord's Messiah who's speaking out of it. And the burning bush itself is a picture of Messiah as well. And he's come to tell Moses something. And what's he come to tell him here in Exodus 3, verses 6 through 10? Wherever he said, I am the Lord God, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Moses hid his face and was afraid to look upon God. And the Lord said, I have surely seen the affliction of my people which are in Egypt. They have heard their cry by reason of their taskmasters, for I know their sorrows. And I have come down to deliver them out of the land of the Egyptians, and to bring them out of the land out of that land into a good land and a large, into a land flowing with milk and honey, to the place of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites. Now, therefore, behold, the cry of the children of Israel is coming to me, and I've seen the oppression wherewith the Egyptians have oppressed them. Come now, therefore, and I'll send you to Pharaoh, and he may bring forth my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. That Messiah, the Melech Hanani, is pre-incarnate, and for that burning, speaks to that burning bush that again is a picture of him as well, of Messiah. And the time for deliverance has come. Here in Messiah's return, his parents brought him back into Israel after Herod died. The time to return was when the king died, the king of Egypt that sought Moses' life. The time for deliverance has come. The time for the deliverer to be revealed is come. It's time for the arrival of the deliverer onto the stage to bring about deliverance. And now Moses is being told the time to do the job you tried to do on your own strength before has arrived, and you're not going to do it in your own strength anymore. Notice, I've come down to deliver them. In Moses, you deliver them. I'm coming down to deliver them. And those again that we looked upon, he was afraid to look upon God. And notice how this Messiah, this angel of the Lord, the Melech Adonai, identifies himself as the God of, notice, Moses' father first, and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is summarized for us here in Acts 7, verses 30 through 35. Now, when 40 years were expired, there appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai an angel of the Lord in a flame of a flame of fire in a bush. But Moses saw it, he wondered at the sight, and he drew near to behold it. The voice of the Lord came unto him, saying, I am the Lord God of your fathers, the father of Abraham, the father of Isaac, and the father of Jacob. Then Moses trembled and durst not behold. The Lord said to him, put your shoes off your feet. The place you stand is holy ground. I have seen the affliction of my people which is in Egypt. I have heard their groaning and come down to deliver them. And now I will send you into Egypt. This Moses, whom they refused, who made you a ruler and a judge, the same to God sent to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel which appeared to him in the bush. Okay, I think they bring out here about the holy ground. Why did he want not to have his shoe, not to get closer, but why take his shoes off? Why? Because the shoes were bare, the ground was holy because Messiah was there. And the shoes were a barrier between contact between Moses and Messiah. We need to remove the barriers between us in contact with Messiah. That barrier might be sin, but it might not be. It may be as simple as not doing as something we've been being dealt with to do that we just haven't wanted to do yet. We just keep putting it off. It might be not making time for Messiah, not having a God time in your life. Whatever it is, you need to remove the barrier that's between you and Messiah so you can be connected to him as Moses was. And so the angels appeared in the bush because now is the time of deliverance. And today is the time of deliverance. There's a time of deliverance in your life as well. Now, when we're talking about eternal sin, we're talking about salvation from eternal damnation. That day of deliverance is today. Messiah's already done what he needs to deliver you. Today is your day of deliverance, but you may be going under something in your life that's hard and oppressive. And you may be tempted to try to deliver yourself. You may look at your position or whatever the case is and try to deliver yourself. But God is working something out in your life through that. I mean, Israel had went into idolatry, most of them. It was the oppression that started turning them back towards seeking God. They perhaps didn't have quite the right attitude, but they were back to seeking him. Some of them were calling out to him to end the oppression. And that's the beginning often of repentance. It's his goodness that draws us to repentance. There's maybe something in your life that the oppression is forcing out that is not in line with the will of God, of Yahweh, Yahuwah, however you like. But your day of deliverance, the time of your deliverance will come. But you've got to let it be God's timing, not your timing. You got to let him work it out, not try to deliver yourself, because you cannot deliver yourself. You just make a mess of things like Moses did. If you try to deliver yourself and you don't rely on God and you do it before it's the time of deliverance. That's all I have for this week. Until next week, shalom.